This presentation covers time value of money, Chapter 6, and we're going to be looking at present value of an ordinary annuity, and present value of an annuity due. And this is covered in a number of your chapters. The time value of money means money can be invested today to earn interest and grow to a larger dollar amount in the future, useful in valuing a variety of assets and liabilities. But what it also means is present value is what is the dollar amount of something that you're going to receive or owe sometimes in the future. What's its value in today's dollars? That's primarily what we're going to be looking at. Now there's two types of interest. There's compound versus simple. Interest is the amount of money paid or received in excess of the amount of money borrowed or lent. Simple interest is the initial investment times the interest rate times the period of time equals interest earned. So for example, if you had $100 invested for 3 years at 5%, you would end up with an extra $15 at the end of year 3. What instead if you did compound interest? It includes interest not only on the initial investment but also on the accumulated interest earned in previous periods. So with compound interest you earn a higher rate. So in this case, if it said it paid 5% and it's compound, in the first year you would receive $5. In the second year you would receive $5.25 because it would be $100 plus the previous year's $5 times 5%. So now for that year you're actually earning 5.25%. And in year 3 you're going to take the $100 plus the previous two interest amounts that were earned of $10.25 times 5%. And now if you notice the interest we've earned, and this is what's called the effective rate when we look at the actual interest earned versus the amount stated. In this case, we've actually, if we had had compound interest, at the end of year 3, we'd have $15.76. Now, there are actually 6 tables at the back of your book, but the first 3 are the 3 that we use to determine present value, and that's primarily what we're concerned with when we're working the problems. We're looking at what are things worth in today's dollars. Now first we have what we call the present value table, and it's the present value of a single sum. It's used to determine the current value of a single sum that will be received sometime in the future at an assumed interest rate. So an example would be you're going to owe $1,000 in 3 years and it's going to be at 10%. What's that worth in today's dollars? Present value of an ordinary annuity. This is used to determine the current value of multiple payments of the same amount received in the future, with cash flow starting at the end of each period. Now, the only time you can use the PVA table is the dollar amount is exactly the same for the multiple payments. So maybe you're going to receive $1,000 a month for 3 years. If, however, you are going to receive payments in the future, but they're different amounts, then what you'd have to do on each payment, you'd have to use the present value table of a single sum. So, an example would be if we owe $1,000 a month for 3 years with 10% first payment due at the end of the first period at 10%, what would that be worth in today's dollars? Now, present value of an annuity due is the same thing as the PVA table, except the assumption is that you're going to receive the same payment over a period of time in the future. However, the first payment is owed at the date of the contract or when the deal initially starts. So that's a different table. So what you want to make sure you do is whenever you're working a problem, you need to focus on, if it's an annuity, when is the first payment due? Is it at the end of the period? Use the PVA table. If it's at the beginning of the period, you use the PVAD table. Now the second 3 are These are future. Okay, let me start that again. We are looking at future value. If we have an amount of money today, what is it worth in the future? Well, if we have a single sum and it's due sometime in the future, we would use a future value table. If instead we're going to receive payments in the future, what is that worth today? And future value of annuity due, what is it worth today if the first payment was due at the beginning of the period? So, present value of a single sum. Future value requires the addition of interest. Present value requires the removal of interest. Now we're going to walk through some examples. And a good example is trying to figure out the best financing decision. So my company is in the process of purchasing several large pieces of equipment, and several financing alternatives have been offered. One is you can pay $1 million when you receive the equipment. Two, you can pay $420,000 immediately and the remainder in 10 installments of $80,000 with the first installment due at the end of the year. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough and I'm trying to catch it before I cough, but try this again. Now, the third option is 10 annual installments of $135,000 with the first payment due immediately. And our fourth option is to just make a lump sum payment of $1.5 million in 5 years from the date of purchase. We're going to assume that we can borrow at a rate of 8%. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the different present value tables, because what we want to do is take alternative 2 through 4 and turn those into today's dollars so we can compare it with paying $1 million today. Now our first option is to pay $420,000 immediately and the remainder in 10 annual installments of $80,000 with the first installment due in 1 year. So first we need to compare the present value of the options, so we're going to do option 2. First thing we need to look at is we have an immediate value of $420,000, which means that is the present value. So we don't have to do anything with the $420,000. We have 10 annual payments of $80,000. We need to convert this to present value, and that means since there are 10 annual payments of the same amount, we're going to use an annuity table. Now, the number of periods is 10, and the reason it's 10 is because we're doing it each year. And the first installment is due in 1 year. So that means we're going to use that table, present value of ordinary annuity, or PVA table. And our interest rate is 8%. Now, here's the thing to remember. You always want to pay attention to the number of periods and the interest rate, because that determines what you use when you use the tables. Now, periods are how often a payment is going to occur. Interest rate is always stated on an annual basis. So if this was going to be paid twice a year, the interest rate would be divided by 2 and become 4%. And therefore you would look at that, use that when you look at the table, but the number of periods now become 20 because you're going to be doing it twice a year. So remember, you have to pay close attention to when the payments are going to be made. Are they going to be done annually or semi-annually or quarterly or monthly? Because that's going to affect the interest rate that you use and the number of periods when you go to the tables. Now, again, since we have multiple payments of the same amount and the payments are at the end of the period, we're going to use the present value of an ordinary annuity table to get our factor. So this is our table, and the first thing we do is we go down the side and we select 10 periods. Then we're going to go across and we're going to go to 8% because it's annual, and there's our factor, and we're going to use this factor times the 80,000 to come up with the present value of that 80,000. So again, we have option 1 is pay $1 million. Now let's see what the net present value of our second option is. So the initial payment is $420. The net present value of the $80,000 annuity is $536,805. So the net present value of this option is $956,806. Now we can go on to our next option. Now our next option is we're going to make 10 annual installments of $135,000 with the first payment due immediately. We need to convert this into today's dollars. So we're going to have a payment. The annual payment is going to be $135,000. The number of periods is 10 because there are annual payments. And the interest rate is going to be 8%. And since they're annual payments, it's going to stay 8%, which is always, again, given as an annual amount. So, since the first payment is due immediately and we have multiple payments of the same amount, we're going to use the present value of an annuity due table, PVAD, which is what appears in your homework. So here's our present value of an annuity due. Always make sure you have the right table. So we're going to go down to 10 years. We're going to go across to 8%, and that's going to be our factor. So option 2 is going to have a net present value of $978,330. Now we're going to go to option 4. So option 4 is going to be one lump sum payment of $1.5 million 5 years from today. Again, the payment is one single payment at the end of 5 periods. And the interest rate is going to be 8% since it's annual. So we're just going to use our present value table. So this again is our present value table. And we're going to go down to 5 years. We're going to go across to 8%. And that's going to be our factor. So when we look at this, our best option would be option number 2. That is the best deal because it's the lowest cost in today's dollars. And that is the end of this presentation on time value of money. And this is part 1 of 2.